Admiral Hannah Park stood on the bridge of the Terran Alliance flagship, listening to the distant hum of the engines. The vast viewing window revealed endless stars against the black void. 20 years of military service had taken her across the galaxy, but today felt different. Today would change everything. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Kelteri Council," said Lieutenant Sawan from his communication station. "It's marked as urgent." Hannah nodded. "Put it through to my private office." She walked briskly through the gleaming metal corridors of the TSS Valiant. Crew members saluted as she passed. Her office was small but efficiently arranged, with minimal personal items except a small crystal orb, a gift from the Kelteri ambassador years ago. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the thin, graceful form of Elder Dowan. The Kelteri's skin had a pale blue sheen, and his large eyes seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Even through the hologram, Hannah could see the distress in his posture. "Admiral Park," Dowan's voice trembled slightly, "I speak to you in our darkest hour." "Elder Dowan, what has happened?" Hannah asked, already dreading the answer. "The Voidborn Dominion has begun systematic attacks on our outer colonies. 3 worlds have already fallen. Millions dead." His voice caught. "Our defenses cannot hold against their numbers." Hannah's face remained composed, but her hands tightened into fists beneath her desk. The Voidborn were known across the galaxy as merciless conquerors, a species believing themselves destined to rule all others. "We need help, Admiral," Dowan continued. "The Kelteri Council has voted unanimously. We formally request assistance under the Covenant of Gratitude, signed between our peoples 3 centuries ago." The Covenant. Every human child learned about it in school. When humanity first ventured beyond their solar system, they had been naive, unprepared. The experimental warp drive on the pioneer ship Aurora had malfunctioned near a neutron star. The crew would have perished if not for the Kelteri vessel that rescued them. In gratitude, humanity had sworn a formal debt to the Kelteri people, a promise of aid should they ever require it. "I understand the significance of this request," Hannah said carefully. "I must consult with the Alliance Council, but know that I personally recognize our obligation. Please hurry, Admiral. The Voidborn fleet moves toward our home system even now." After the transmission ended, Hannah immediately contacted Earth. Within hours, the Alliance Council had convened an emergency session. Hannah stood in the center of the circular chamber, surrounded by the projected images of 15 counselors representing Earth and its colony worlds. "The situation is clear," Hannah concluded her briefing. "The Kelteri face extinction without our intervention. They have formally invoked the Covenant of Gratitude." Council President Tail leaned forward, his aged face serious. "Admiral, we understand the historical significance, but the Voidborn Dominion commands the largest military force in charted space. They have technology we can barely comprehend. Intervention would risk open war. With respect, Mr. President, the Covenant is binding," Hannah replied. "It was signed when humanity was weak and needed friends. Now we are strong, and our friends need us." Counselor Jinwoo from Mars Colony shook his head. "That agreement was made 300 years ago. Most species would consider such an ancient promise meaningless by now." "Then perhaps that is what makes us human," Hannah said quietly. "We remember our debts." The debate continued for hours. Some counselors argued for limited humanitarian aid only. Others suggested diplomatic pressure through galactic channels. A few supported full military intervention. "The Voidborn respect only strength," argued Counselor Minsu from the Neptune stations. "If we show weakness, we might be their next target regardless of what we do now. Our intelligence suggests the Dominion has been watching humanity with increasing interest," added Defense Minister Yuna. "Perhaps confrontation is inevitable, and better to happen on our terms." Finally, President Taeyul called for a vote. The chamber fell silent as counselors made their decisions. One by one, green lights appeared on the voting display. "The motion passes," announced Taeyul, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. The Terran Alliance will honor the Covenant of Gratitude and provide full military assistance to the Kelteri people against Voidborn aggression. Hannah felt relief wash over her, followed by the sobering realization of what would come next. "Thank you, Council. I request immediate authorization to mobilize the Second and Third Fleets." "Granted, Admiral," Teal replied. "May the stars watch over this endeavor." Back aboard the Valiant, Hannah called her senior officers to the command center. The large tactical table displayed a three-dimensional map of Kelteri space and the advancing Voidborn forces. "We have our orders," she told them simply. "The Alliance will honor its debt to the Kelteri people." Commander Shunho, her tactical officer, studied the display with concern. "The Voidborn outnumber us significantly, Admiral. Their warships are larger and their weapons technology is at least a generation ahead of ours." "Numbers and technology aren't everything," Hannah replied. "We have advantages they don't understand." "What advantages, Admiral?" asked Lieutenant Sion. "Human ingenuity, adaptability, and most importantly, they don't take us seriously." Hannah smiled slightly. "The Voidborn, like most species, see humans as newcomers to galactic politics. They underestimate what we can do when properly motivated." Throughout the next day, orders spread across human space. Reserve forces were activated. Mothballed warships were rapidly recommissioned. Production facilities shifted to military supplies. In her quarters that night, Hannah recorded a personal message to be sent to her family on Earth. She didn't know when, or if, she would see them again. "We're about to remind the galaxy why promises matter," she said to the recorder. "The Kelteri saved us when we were nothing. Now we will save them, whatever the cost." 3 days later, the largest military fleet in human history assembled at the edge of Kelteri space. Over 200 warships prepared for combat jump. "All vessels report ready, Admiral," Commander Jono announced. Hannah nodded. "Send one final message to the Voidborn Command. Tell them that humanity honors its debts, and they have until our arrival to withdraw from Kelteri space. And if they refuse, then they're about to learn a very painful lesson about human nature." Hannah gave the order that would change the course of galactic history. "All ships, commence jump sequence. We have a promise to keep." Commander Wonjin of the Voidborn Dominion stood on the command deck of the dreadnought Inevitable Conquest, watching the burning Kelteri colony through the massive observation window. Flames consumed cities across the planet's surface, visible even from orbit. This was the 5th Kelteri world to fall in 2 months. "Resistance has ceased," Commander reported his second-in-command, Mrek. "Shall we proceed with resource extraction?" Wanjin nodded, his scaled skin reflecting the orange glow of the burning planet. "Begin immediately. The Supreme Command expects this system to be stripped and secured within 3 cycles." The Voidborn had conquered half the galaxy through methodical efficiency. Their strategy never varied: overwhelming force, systematic elimination of military assets, then resource extraction. Few species offered meaningful resistance. The Kelteri, with their philosophy of harmony and minimal military, had been particularly easy targets. "Commander," called the sensor officer suddenly. Multiple objects emerging from hyperspace at the system edge. Wanjin turned with mild curiosity. "Kelteri reinforcements?" "No, sir. Configuration unknown." The officer paused, checking readings. "They appear to be human vessels." A murmur of surprise rippled through the command deck. Humans were known to the Voidborn, of course, but considered a minor species from a backwater region. Their technology was unremarkable, their territory limited, their military presence in galactic affairs minimal. "How many ships?" Wanjin asked, more annoyed than concerned. 47, Commander. Various sizes." Wanjin made a dismissive gesture. "The humans have no business here. Send 2 attack cruisers to intercept. If they resist, destroy them. If they retreat, let them go." But before his orders could be carried out, all communication systems activated simultaneously. A human face appeared on every screen on the command deck. a female with stern features and dark eyes. "This is Admiral Hannah Park of the Terran Alliance. You are engaged in hostile action against the Keltari people, who stand under human protection. Cease all military operations immediately and withdraw from Keltari space, or face the consequences." Laughter erupted across the command deck. Wonjin himself chittered with amusement, his mandibles clicking rapidly. The soft skins think to challenge the Dominion. He signaled to his communications officer. "Inform this human that the Keltari worlds now belong to the Voidborn. They may leave peacefully or be destroyed." But as the Voidborn cruisers moved to intercept the human fleet, something unexpected happened. Instead of maintaining formation or retreating, the human vessels split into small, irregular groups, each moving in different patterns at different speeds. "What are they doing?" Wonjin demanded, watching the tactical display with growing confusion. "Unknown, Commander. Their movements don't match any known combat doctrine." The first shots were fired by the Voidborn cruisers, standard procedure against inferior forces. What followed stunned the Voidborn observers. The human vessels didn't try to match the Voidborn's superior firepower. Instead, they executed maneuvers no Voidborn tactician had ever encountered, using the system's asteroid field and the planet's gravity to gain positional advantages. "3 human ships approaching our western flank," reported the tactical officer urgently. "Destroy them," ordered Wonjin. The Voidborn weapons fired, but the human vessels performed rapid directional changes that should have torn apart their structural integrity. 2 evaded completely. The third was hit but continued its approach despite significant damage. "Impossible," muttered Mrek. "Their inertial compensators cannot be that advanced." Before Wonjin could respond, alarms blared across the command deck. Multiple Keltari transport ships launching from the surface, called the sensor officer. "They're evacuating the remaining population." Wonjin hissed in anger. "Intercept those transports." No survivors. But the human fleet had positioned itself precisely to prevent this. Every time Voidborn vessels moved toward the evacuating Keltari, human ships would appear in their path, engaging with unexpected tactics. Some human vessels fired conventional weapons that somehow penetrated Voidborn shields calibrated to stop much more advanced energy weapons. Others deployed unusual devices that disrupted Voidborn targeting systems. "Commander, we've lost contact with attack cruiser Oblivion," reported the communications officer, voice tight with disbelief. "How?" demanded Wonjin. "Unknown. Last transmission showed 3 small human vessels performing suicide runs." Wonjin stared at the tactical display in growing disbelief. The patterns made no sense. The humans fought like no species he had ever encountered. Their ships moved independently rather than in coordinated formations, each captain seemingly making decisions based on immediate circumstances rather than following the central battle plan. It was chaos, but chaos with purpose. "All Keltari transports have cleared the atmosphere," reported the sensor officer. "The humans are covering their escape." Wonjin slammed his armored fist on the command console. "Launch all fighter squadrons. I want those transports destroyed." But even as he gave the order, the human fleet executed another unpredictable maneuver. The smaller vessels that had been engaging defensively suddenly formed a tight, aggressive formation and drove straight toward the inevitable conquest. "Evasive action," Wonjin ordered, but the massive dreadnought was too slow to maneuver quickly. The humans didn't fire their weapons. Instead, they released thousands of small objects on approach. "What are those?" Mrek asked, staring at the sensor readings. The answer came seconds later as the objects detonated against the dreadnought's hull, creating electromagnetic pulses that cascaded through its systems. Lights flickered, weapons went offline, and for 7 critical seconds, the mighty Voidborn flagship was paralyzed. In those seconds, the last Keltari transports escaped into hyperspace, along with their human protectors. When systems finally stabilized, Wonjin faced a humiliating reality. A superior Voidborn force had failed to prevent a civilian evacuation protected by an inferior human fleet. Send word to Supreme Command. He ordered, rage barely contained. The humans have interfered in Dominion affairs, and they have demonstrated concerning capabilities. Across the galaxy, in the Supreme Command Center of the Voidborn Dominion, the report from Commander Wanjin caused immediate alarm. Supreme Commander Karth assembled his senior staff. The humans were supposed to be technologically primitive, said his chief strategist. How do they defeat a standard conquest force? Not through technology, replied the intelligence director, studying the battle recordings. Through unpredictability, through tactics no rational species would employ. Supreme Commander Karth's eyes narrowed. Find out everything about these humans. Their strengths, their weaknesses, their reasons for protecting the Kelteri. No species sacrifices for another without gain. There is one curious detail, noted the intelligence director. The human transmission referenced a protection relationship with the Kelteri. Our archives indicate a minor historical connection. The Kelteri rescued a human exploration vessel 3 centuries ago. Impossible, Karth dismissed. No species honors such ancient, meaningless debts. But as more reports arrived from other systems where humans had appeared to evacuate Kelteri populations, Supreme Commander Karth began to realize they faced something unprecedented. A species that fought not for territory or resources, but for an idea, the repayment of a debt. And that made them dangerous in ways the Voidborn had never encountered before. Elder Ki-Yun of the Kelteri sat in the observation chamber aboard the human flagship Valiant, watching the stars through the large viewing window. His pale blue skin reflected the soft light as he contemplated the strange allies who had come to his people's aid. Beside him, Admiral Hannah Park stood in silence, allowing the elder time with his thoughts. You fight unlike any species we have encountered, Ki-Yun finally said, his voice melodic even through the translation system. I have studied 2,000 years of galactic conflicts. Most species are predictable in war. How so? Hannah asked, her attention still partly on the tactical display showing their fleet positions. The Voidborn rely on overwhelming numbers and technological superiority. The Centauri use perfect formations and synchronized attacks. The Myth-Ari swarm their enemies until resistance collapses. Ki-Yun turned his large eyes toward Hannah. But humans, you are chaotic and disciplined at the same time. Your captains make individual decisions within a larger strategy. You use simple weapons alongside complex ones. You retreat, then suddenly attack. The Voidborn cannot predict your actions. Hannah smiled slightly. Most species evolve toward specialization. Humans evolved for adaptability. It frightens the Voidborn, Ki-Yun observed. They understand strength. They understand technology. They do not understand unpredictability. In the intelligence center of the Voidborn command ship Inevitable Destiny, Supreme Commander Karth reviewed battle recordings with growing frustration. The room was filled with his top analysts and strategists, all struggling to make sense of human combat tactics. Show me the Bellary system engagement again, Karth ordered. The holographic display activated, showing a Voidborn battle group of 7 ships engaging 4 human vessels near a gas giant. The human ships were smaller and less heavily armed, yet the battle ended with 3 Voidborn ships destroyed and the rest retreating. Their technology is inferior, said Chief Analyst Mrek. Their weapons are less powerful. Their shields are weaker, yet they defeated our forces. It defies logic. Because they do not fight logically, replied Intelligence Officer Shuren, a younger Voidborn who had been studying human history. Look at this maneuver here. The recording showed a human ship deliberately flying into an asteroid field, drawing Voidborn pursuers into a trap where other human vessels waited. No rational commander would risk their vessel in such a manner, continued Shuren. The Voidborn would never sacrifice positional advantage like this. The Centauri would consider it inefficient. Yet the humans do it without hesitation. Karth's mandibles clicked in irritation. Why? What do they gain by protecting the Kelteri? Resources, territory, political advantage. Nothing tangible, Supreme Commander, Shuren admitted. We've analyzed all diplomatic channels. Their only stated motivation is repayment of a debt from centuries ago, when the Kelteri saved a single human vessel. Impossible. Karth dismissed. No species sacrifices for mere sentiment. The humans do, Shuren said quietly. And that makes them dangerous. Back on the Valiant, Admiral Hannah met with her senior officers in the tactical center. The large table displayed a three-dimensional map of the Kelteri home system, which intelligence suggested would be the Voidborn's next target. The main Voidborn fleet is gathering at these coordinates, explained Commander Shonno, pointing to a region at the edge of the system. Our scouts report at least 80 warships, including 3 dreadnoughts. We have only 52 vessels that can reach the system in time, added Tactical Officer Mena. Even with our allies, we're outnumbered. Numbers aren't everything, Hannah replied. We've proven that in every engagement so far. The Voidborn are adapting, warned Intelligence Officer Taedong. They're studying our tactics, looking for patterns. Hannah nodded. Then we'll give them new patterns to study. Lieutenant Sanwan, what's the status of Operation Silent Drop? The infiltration teams are ready, Admiral. 20 Special Forces units prepared to board and disable Voidborn command ships. And the Kelteri volunteers. Elder Kian, who had joined the meeting, answered, 300 of our people have stepped forward. They will serve as navigators and translators for your teams. Many have lost family to the Voidborn and seek to honor their memory. Hannah looked around the table at her officers. The Voidborn believe they understand us now. They think we're simply warriors like them, just with different tactics. They're wrong. We're not fighting because we love war. We're fighting because we keep our promises. On a small observation vessel at the edge of the Eridani system, representatives from 12 neutral species watched the ongoing conflict with intense interest. These observers came from governments wanting to understand the unexpected war between the Voidborn Dominion and the previously unremarkable humans. The humans continue to defy conventional analysis, noted the Thelian observer, her crystalline form shimmering as she spoke. Their tactics change with each engagement. What fascinates me is their motivation, replied the Elorian diplomat. They risk destruction for a species they barely interact with, based on an ancient obligation. Perhaps we have misunderstood humans all along, suggested the Ventari scientist. We classified them as a minor species because they claimed little territory and built modest fleets. We interpreted this as weakness. But it was choice, finished the Thelian. They could have expanded like the Voidborn or the Centauri. Instead, they developed inward, perfecting their adaptability. And now the galaxy trembles, said the Elorian, watching as human ships executed another impossible maneuver on their monitoring screen. Not because humans are conquerors, but because they remember their debts. As the observers continued their discussion, encrypted transmissions flowed between their respective governments. Military budgets were being reconsidered. Diplomatic initiatives toward Earth were being drafted. The galaxy was reassessing humanity's place in the cosmic order. In her private quarters, Admiral Hannah reviewed the latest casualty reports. 3 human ships lost in the last engagement. Nearly 200 crew members dead. The cost was mounting, but they had successfully evacuated 2 more Keltari worlds. Her communication panel chimed. A message from Earth. The Alliance Council had voted to commit additional resources to the war effort. Public support was overwhelming. Across human space, citizens rallied behind the cause. The debt to the Kelteri had become a symbol of human identity. Admiral, called Commander Shunho through the intercom. Long-range sensors detect the Voidborn fleet is on the move. They're heading for the Kelteri homeworld. Hannah closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself for what would come next. Alert all ships. We move to intercept. The greatest battle of the war was about to begin, and with it, the galaxy would learn the true nature of humanity. The massive Voidborn vessel, named Stellar Executioner, entered the Kelteri home system slowly, like a predator confident in its power. Unlike normal warships, This craft was built around a single terrible weapon, a device capable of inducing artificial stellar collapse. The Voidborn had used it only twice before, destroying entire solar systems to crush resistance. Supreme Commander Karth stood on the command deck, surveying the 50 battlecruisers escorting his superweapon. After weeks of unexpected defeats, he had decided to end the conflict decisively. The Kelteri homeworld would be destroyed as an example to all who defied the Dominion, especially the troublesome humans. "We detect no enemy vessels in the system," Supreme Commander reported his sensor officer. "The way to the Kelteri homeworld is clear." Karth's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The humans have finally learned their limitations. Begin charging the stellar collapse device. But at that moment, alarms sounded across the command deck. The tactical officer's voice was tight with surprise. Multiple ships appearing from hyperspace. They're emerging in unusual patterns. The main display showed human vessels materializing not in standard formation, but in small clusters throughout the system. Some appeared perilously close to Voidborn ships, others near planetary bodies, some within the system's asteroid belt. "How many?" demanded Karth. "At least 70 vessels, Supreme Commander. Different sizes and classes." Karth's confidence wavered slightly. The humans had gathered a larger force than intelligence had predicted possible. Still, numbers alone wouldn't save them. "They cannot stop the stellar executioner," he declared. "Maintain course. Increase speed." Aboard the human flagship Valiant, Admiral Hannah Park watched the tactical display showing the Voidborn fleet's position. Her eyes were drawn to the massive shape of the stellar executioner. "Our intelligence was correct," she said quietly. "They brought their planet killer." Commander Shunho nodded grimly. "The weapon requires 4 hours to fully charge once in position. We must prevent it from reaching optimal range of the Kelteri homeworld." "Do the Voidborn know what we're planning?" asked Lieutenant Siwan. "Impossible," replied Intelligence Officer Taedong. "Operation Breaking Wave was developed only 3 days ago, and we've maintained complete communication silence." Hannah studied the positions of her scattered fleet. To conventional military thinking, their formation appeared chaotic, even suicidal. But this deliberate chaos was their advantage. "All ships, commence Operation Breaking Wave," she ordered. "May the stars watch over us all." What followed demonstrated why humanity had quickly become feared across the galaxy. Instead of gathering into a unified battle group to challenge the Voidborn fleet directly, the scattered human vessels began executing what appeared to be individual, uncoordinated attacks. Karth watched in confusion as human ships darted between his carefully arranged formations, firing briefly before changing course unpredictably. "What is their strategy?" he demanded. "This appears random." "They're targeting our communication arrays," reported his tactical officer suddenly. 3 battle cruisers have lost primary communications. More reports flooded in. Human vessels were attacking specific systems on different ships. Propulsion on some, weapons on others, sensors on yet more. No ship was being destroyed outright, but across the Voidborn fleet, capabilities were being systematically degraded. "They're weakening our network," realized Chief Analyst Mrek. "Voidborn strength comes from synchronized operations. They're forcing our ships to fight individually." Karth hissed in frustration. "Launch all fighter squadrons. Destroy those human pests." The Voidborn fighters swarmed from their carrier vessels, over 1,000 small agile craft designed for intercepting enemy ships. But again, the humans defied conventional tactics. Rather than evading, several human vessels released what appeared to be clouds of metallic dust into space. When the Voidborn fighters entered these clouds, their engines sputtered and failed. The particles had been programmed to seek and disable specific Voidborn technology. "Impossible," raged Karth. "Their technology cannot be this advanced." "It isn't advanced," replied Intelligence Officer Shurin quietly. "It's different. Unpredictable. They're using simple solutions we never considered." As the battle progressed, strange reports came from across the Voidborn fleet. Human Special Forces teams had somehow boarded 3 battlecruisers. Unexpected radiation was interfering with internal sensors. Communication between ships became increasingly difficult. Then the true purpose of the human tactics became clear. Supreme Commander called the sensor officer in alarm. Multiple human vessels on direct collision course with the Stellar Executioner. "Destroy them," ordered Karth. The Stellar Executioner's defensive weapons fired, destroying 2 approaching human ships. But 3 more continued their approach, absorbing devastating hits without changing course. "They're sacrificing themselves," whispered Shurin in disbelief. The human vessels struck the Stellar Executioner's hull in precise locations. Rather than simply exploding, they released specialized penetrating charges that burned through the outer armor. Moments later, smaller craft emerged from hiding places in the system's asteroid field, following the paths cleared by their sacrificial companions. These crafts carried elite human teams directly into the superweapon. Fighting erupted within the massive vessel as human soldiers battled Voidborn defenders for control of critical systems. Aboard the Valiant, Admiral Hannah received the transmission she had been waiting for. "Insertion teams have reached the primary containment chamber. Charges set. Awaiting your command." Hannah closed her eyes briefly. The teams would not survive. "Give the order. May your sacrifice be remembered." On the Stellar Executioner, Karth received the horrifying news that humans had reached the antimatter containment facility. Before he could respond, multiple explosions rocked the massive ship. "Containment breach," shouted his engineer. "The collapse device is destabilizing." "Evacuate," ordered Karth. "All ships withdraw immediately." But it was too late. As Voidborn vessels frantically attempted to distance themselves, the Stellar Executioner's power core went critical. The explosion was visible across the entire system. The most powerful weapon in the galaxy destroyed by what the Voidborn had considered an inferior species. In the aftermath, nearly a third of the Voidborn fleet lay in ruins. The remainder retreated in disarray, their formations broken, their confidence shattered. Observation ships from neutral species recorded everything, transmitting footage across the galaxy. They captured human vessels deliberately sacrificing themselves to create openings for their companions. They recorded tactics no simulator would have predicted as viable. They witnessed a species that fought not with overwhelming technology, but with creativity, determination, and willingness to sacrifice. As reports spread, diplomatic missions throughout known space received urgent instructions from their governments. Reassess the human threat level immediately. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their ships or their guns. It was their unpredictability and their absolute commitment to repaying their debts. The diplomatic station orbiting the Keltari homeworld gleamed in the light of twin suns. Built centuries ago as a meeting place for galactic powers, it had never hosted an event of such significance. Representatives from 37 species had gathered to witness what many had thought impossible: the formal surrender of the Voidborn Dominion. Supreme Commander Karth entered the great circular chamber flanked by 4 guards. His exoskeleton bore the black markings of mourning for his fallen warriors. The proud Voidborn leader, who had conquered 100 worlds, now walked with the stiff posture of one facing the greatest humiliation of his life. Across the chamber stood Admiral Hannah Park, her Terran Alliance uniform bearing the scars of recent battle. Beside her waited Elder Kian, representing the Keltari Council of Elders. "Let the proceedings begin," announced the neutral Venturi mediator. Karth approached the central table where the surrender documents waited. His voice, usually commanding, sounded hollow through the translation system. "The terms," he asked simply. "Complete withdrawal from all Keltari territory," Hannah stated. "Reparations for destroyed worlds. A non-aggression treaty lasting 100 years. The assembled delegates murmured in surprise. Many had expected humans to demand territorial concessions or technology transfers. The Voidborn controlled resources and knowledge that could greatly benefit humanity. Karth's eyes narrowed with suspicion. You could demand our complete subjugation. Your victory was decisive. We fought to repay a debt, not to conquer. Hannah replied evenly. Remember that, should you ever consider threatening a human ally again. This response sent another wave of whispers through the chamber. The mercy being shown seemed more terrifying to many observers than conquest would have been. It demonstrated that humans chose their conflicts deliberately, fought them with unwavering determination, and ended them with calculated restraint. Karth signed the documents with a sharp gesture, then turned without another word and left the chamber. The once mighty Voidborn Dominion had suffered its first defeat in 5 centuries of expansion. After the ceremony, delegations from across the galaxy approached Hannah with diplomatic overtures. Species that had previously dismissed humanity as unimportant now sought alliances, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts. Everyone wants to be friends with the species that defeated the Voidborn, observed Commander Junot with a wry smile. They're not seeking friendship, Hannah replied. They're seeking protection, or they're assessing whether we might be the next threat. In the Grand Hall of the Kelteri Conclave 3 days later, Elder Kian formally declared the ancient debt repaid in a ceremony attended by representatives from across the galaxy. The vast chamber was filled with thousands of Kelteri citizens and hundreds of foreign dignitaries. 3 centuries ago, we saved a single human vessel carrying 87 souls, Kian announced, his voice carrying throughout the hall. In return, humanity saved our entire species from extinction. Let this stand as testament to their honor. A Kelteri choir began a haunting melody, the Song of Memory, traditionally performed to honor great deeds that must never be forgotten. As the music swelled, Hannah was presented with the Crystal of Eternal Gratitude, the highest honor the Kelteri could bestow. This war cost us dearly, Hannah said when the music ended. We lost ships, soldiers, and brave crew members, but we never questioned whether the price was worth paying. A promise made is a promise kept. That is the human way. As the Terran fleet prepared to return home, diplomatic channels throughout the galaxy buzzed with analysis and speculation. Encrypted messages flowed between governments as species reevaluated their understanding of humanity. From the Centauri Concordat, the humans fight with precision that rivals our own, yet each of their commanders thinks independently. This combination should not be effective, yet it is devastatingly so. From the Myth-Airy Collective, they employ technology centuries behind the Voidborn, yet defeat their finest weapons through applications we never considered. From the Thelian Assembly, most concerning is their motivation. They remember obligations others would have forgotten. They fight for honor rather than gain. How does one predict or counter such a species? On the observation deck of the Valiant, Hannah stood alone, watching the stars. The ship would soon jump to hyperspace, beginning the journey back to Earth. She reflected on how fundamentally the galaxy had changed in just a few months. When they had first arrived in Kelteri space, the human fleet had been viewed as a curiosity, a minor power intervening in affairs beyond its understanding. Now, intelligence reports indicated that 12 species had increased their military budgets, and diplomatic initiatives toward Earth had tripled. Commander Shunho joined her at the window. The Alliance Council has sent congratulations. There will be parades when we return. Hannah nodded. And new requests for protection, I imagine. Now that the galaxy knows we honor our commitments, everyone will want one. Is that a bad thing? It means responsibility. Power always does. Hannah turned from the stars to face her second-in-command. The Voidborn underestimated us because they couldn't understand fighting for an idea rather than conquest. Others won't make that mistake again. So what happens now? Chono asked. We go home, we rebuild, and we remember what made us strong. Hannah looked back at the stars. It wasn't our weapons or our tactics. It was our promise. As the Valiant prepared for hyperspace jump, observers across the galaxy watched the human fleet depart. Military strategists studied their formations. Political analysts debated their intentions. Philosophers questioned their nature. The Ventari scientist, who had witnessed the surrender ceremony, wrote in his private journal words that would eventually become famous throughout known space. Today marks a turning point in galactic history. The humans were not feared before because they controlled little territory and built modest fleets. We interpreted this as weakness. We were wrong. Their strength lies not in conquest, but in conviction. They are not feared because they are conquerors. They are feared because they are protectors who will move stars to repay their debts. On the Keltari homeworld, children gathered in learning centers to hear the story of how humans crossed the stars to save a people they barely knew, because of a promise made long ago. In Voidborn territory, military academies revised their tactical doctrines to account for human unpredictability. In the chambers of the Galactic Council, debates began about inviting human representatives to permanent membership. And in the vast darkness between stars, other species whispered to each other a new truth that had spread throughout civilized space. If you save a human life, their people will remember, even centuries later. If you threaten a human ally, they will stop at nothing to protect them. The debt was repaid. The legend was born.